Hello everyone, my name is Daniel. Welcome to my channel English Stories Guru. Why reading stories is important for improving your English. Today, we will learn an excellent way to improve English skills by reading story. You cannot underestimate the power of storytelling. Long and short stories can take you on adventures, teach you about other cultures, and introduce you to new vocabulary words. Not only does it make learning more enjoyable, it also helps you learn grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation without textbook-associated pressure. I hope you have lots of fun and improve English skills from this method, just like many other English learners have. Today I chose a lovely story to help you practice speaking English. So let's get started.
Over the past few decades, people have become less interested in hunger artists. In the past, people could make a lot of money by organizing big shows on their own. But now, it's completely impossible to do that. Things were very different back then. In the past, the hunger artist fascinated everyone in the city. Every day during the fasting period, more and more people joined in. Everyone was excited to see the hunger artist every day. At the end, there were folks with special tickets who spent the whole day sitting in front of a little cage with bars. And there were even times when you could see things at night. And it was even more exciting because of the light from torches. On nice days, the cage was brought outside, and the hunger artist was shown to the kids. The grown-ups saw the hunger artist as a joke, something they did because it was trendy. But the children were amazed. They watched with open mouths and held each other's hands for safety. The hunger artist sat on the scattered straw, refusing to sit in a chair. He wore black tights and looked pale, with his ribs sticking out. Sometimes he nodded politely and forced a smile when answering questions. He even stuck his arm out through the bars so people could feel how skinny he was. But then he retreated into himself, ignoring everything around him. He didn't even pay attention to the clock, which was the only thing in his cage. He just stared ahead with almost closed eyes and occasionally sipped water from a tiny glass to moisten his lips. There were a variety of people watching, in addition to some designated special observers. Surprisingly, these observers were usually butchers. 3 of them would always be on duty, keeping a close eye on the hunger artist day and night. Their job was to make sure he didn't secretly eat anything, but it was really just a way to make people feel better. Those who knew what was going on understood that the hunger artist would never, ever eat anything during the fasting period. Even if someone tried to make him, he couldn't do it because it would go against the rules of his craft. Of course, none of the people watching understood that. Sometimes there were people who watched over the hunger artist at night, but they weren't very attentive. They would sit together in a faraway corner and focus on playing cards. It was clear that they wanted to give the hunger artist a little bit of food, which they believed he could secretly get from somewhere. Watching people was really hard for the hunger artist. They made him feel really sad. They made his fasting really hard. Every now and then, he conquered his weakness and sang while they were watching, trying his best to prove that their doubts about him were unfounded. But that didn't really help much. They were amazed at how he could eat and sing at the same time. He liked it when people sat close to the bars and used bright flashlights to see him better. The bright light didn't bother him at all. Usually, he had a hard time falling asleep, but he could easily take short naps in any kind of light and at any time, even in a crowded, noisy room. He was so excited to have these friends around that he didn't want to go to sleep at all. He was really happy to have fun with them, to share stories from his adventurous life, and then, in return, to hear their stories, doing everything to make sure they stayed awake so he could show them again that he had no food in his cage and that he was fasting like no one else. He was really happy when morning arrived and a big breakfast was brought for them, paid for by him. They ate it eagerly, like healthy men who had worked hard all night without sleeping. Yes, some people thought that the breakfast was a sneaky way to influence the observers, but that was going too far. If they were asked if they wanted to do the night shift without the breakfast, they politely declined, but still, they held on to their doubts. But usually, when people fasted, they often had these doubts connected to it, because nobody had the time to watch the hunger artist every day and night. Nobody could really know if he was truly fasting without any breaks. Only the hunger artist himself could truly understand and appreciate his own fasting. However, the cause of his constant dissatisfaction was something entirely else. Maybe it wasn't fasting that made him so skinny that lots of people had to avoid watching him because they couldn't stand to see him. He was very thin because he wasn't happy with himself. He knew something that even beginners didn't know. Fasting is really simple. It was super simple, like a piece of cake. He couldn't keep quiet about this. Nobody believed him. They thought he was just being humble. Many people thought he was just seeking attention or trying to deceive others. They believed fasting was simple for him because he knew how to make it easier, and he even had the audacity to partially admit it. He had to agree to everything. He had gotten used to it over time, but this feeling of unhappiness always bothered him, and he never, not even once, left his cage willingly after not eating for a while. The person in charge had decided that the fast could only last for 40 days. They were very strict about this and wouldn't let the fasting continue for any longer, even in big cities. And actually, he had a really good reason. From what we've seen, if you advertise a lot for about 40 days, people in the city will start to get interested. But after that, their interest starts to go down, and fewer people pay attention. Some towns and countries had slight variations, but generally speaking, 40 days was the longest amount of time. Then, after 40 days, the door of the cage was opened. The cage was decorated with flowers, and there was a big crowd watching. A band was playing music, and 2 doctors came in to measure the hunger artist. The results were announced to the audience through a loudhailer. Finally, 2 young ladies came in, excited that they were chosen, and they helped the hunger artist out of the cage. There was a small table with a special meal for him to eat, and in that moment, the hunger artist would always resist. He was happy to let the kind ladies help him by holding his skinny arms, but he didn't feel like getting up. Why do we have to stop right now after 40 days? He could have kept going for a really, really long time. For a super duper long time. Why stop right now when he was doing so well and hadn't even reached his peak fasting ability? Why did some people want to take away his fame for fasting longer? Not only did they want him to become the greatest hunger artist ever, which he probably already was, but they also wanted him to surpass himself in an unimaginable way. He believed there were no limits to his ability to fast. Why was this group of people who acted like they really liked him so impatient with him? If he continued on and continued to not eat, why wouldn't they put up with it for a longer time? Also, he was tired and enjoyed sitting in the straw. Now, he had to stand up really straight and tall and go eat, which just thinking about it made him feel really sick right away. He had a hard time not mentioning this because he didn't want to upset the women. He glanced at the faces of these women who seemed nice but were actually mean and shook his very heavy head on his weak neck. But then something happened that always happened. The show manager approached in silence, the music drowning out any conversation. He raised his arms above the emaciated hunger artist, as if beckoning the heavens to witness the spectacle. The hunger artist was indeed a martyr, but in a different sense. The manager carefully held the hunger artist around his thin waist, pretending to handle something delicate. He then handed him over to the pale-faced women, giving him a slight shake, causing his body to sway uncontrollably. At this point, the hunger artist went through a lot. His head was resting on his chest, like it had rolled and stopped there. His body was arched back, and his legs pressed together at the knees, scraping the ground. It seemed like his legs were searching for the real ground. His small body leaned against one of the women, who called for help with flustered breath. She didn't expect her position to be like this. She stretched her neck as far as possible to avoid touching the hunger artist's face. Her companion, who was luckier, only held the hunger artist's hand and trembled. The first woman couldn't hold back her tears, which made the audience laugh. An attendant had to come and take her place, and then it was time to eat. The person in charge gave some food to the hungry performer, who was feeling very weak, almost like passing out, and tried to keep up a happy conversation to distract from the hunger artist's state. After that, everyone raised their glasses to the audience. The hunger artist supposedly whispered something to the impresario. The orchestra played a loud and exciting tune to show their agreement. Then, people started to leave, and the event came to an end. No one had the right to be unhappy with the event, except for the hunger artist. He was always the only one. He lived like this for a long time, taking short breaks often. He seemed to be famous and respected by everyone, but despite that, he was usually sad, and it only got worse over time. Nobody knew how to listen to him and take him seriously. But how could he find comfort? What else did he have left to hope for? And if a kind man who felt sorry for him ever wanted to explain to him that his sadness probably came from not eating, then it could happen that the hunger artist got really angry and started shaking the bars like an animal, scaring everyone. However, the person in charge had a method of dealing with situations like this, which they were not afraid to employ. He would say sorry to the crowd for the hunger artist, admitting that his grumpiness was caused by not eating, which is something that people who have enough food can understand and forgive. Then he would talk about the hunger artist's claim that he could keep fasting for even longer than he already was, which was also difficult to understand. He would admire the efforts, kindness, and sacrifice that surely came with this statement, but then he would try to disprove it by showing photographs that were also available for purchase. In these pictures, you could see the hunger artist on the 40th day of his fast, lying in bed, nearly lifeless from exhaustion. The hunger artist knew this distortion of the truth all too well, but it still made him anxious and overwhelmed. What happened because the fast ended early was now being suggested as the reason for it. It was really hard to fight against not understanding, against this world where people didn't understand each other. He always listened carefully to the person in charge at the bars of his cage. But every time, once the pictures were taken, he would let go of the bars and, with a sigh, sink back into the straw, and a relieved audience could come up again and see him. When people who saw those things remembered them a few years later, sometimes they couldn't understand themselves. But while that change we talked about earlier had happened, it happened right away. Maybe there were other important reasons, but who cared enough to find out? Anyway, one day, the spoilt hunger artist found himself left behind by the group of people seeking pleasure, who liked to go to other fun places. The showman traveled all over Europe once again, hoping to find traces of the past excitement in different places. It was all pointless. It seemed like everyone had secretly agreed to stop fasting performances. Of course, it didn't really happen all at once. Later on, people remembered some things that they hadn't noticed during the exciting times of success. These were signs that were not given enough attention at the time. Unfortunately, it was now too late to do anything about them. Well, it was bound to happen that fasting would become popular again someday. But for the people living in the present, that didn't make them feel any better. What should the hunger artist do next? A man who lots of people had cheered for couldn't show himself in little fair booths. The hunger artist was really old and couldn't do any other job. But what he loved more than anything else was fasting. So he said goodbye to the circus owner, a great friend on his journey through life, and allowed himself to be employed by a big circus. He didn't even bother to read the terms of his contract because he didn't want to feel bad. A big circus with lots of people, animals, and tricks that are always changing can hire anyone at any time, even someone who is very hungry, as long as they don't ask for too much. Furthermore, in this specific situation, it wasn't just the hunger artist himself who was involved, but also his well-known and respected name. Actually, because of the way he made his art, which didn't change even as he got older, no one could say that an old artist who wasn't as good as he used to be wanted to retire and work in a circus. Actually, the hunger artist said that he could go without food just as easily as he did before, and there's no reason to doubt him. He said that if people would let him do what he wanted, he could amaze the world. But because of the mood at the time, the experts only smiled at his claim. But, you see, the hunger artist still remembered how things truly worked. He just knew that people wouldn't put him and his cage as the main attraction right in the middle of the arena. Instead, they would move him to a different, easier to reach place, close to where the animals are kept. Big, colorful signs were all around the cage, telling everyone what they could see inside. Between the main shows, lots of people would walk by the hunger artists area to see the animals. They couldn't help but stop and look for a moment. They might have stayed with him for a while longer, but the people behind them in the narrow hallway, who didn't understand why they stopped to look at the animal stalls, made it impossible to continue peacefully. That's why the hunger artist started to shake during these times when people came to see him, which he always looked forward to as the most important part of his life. When he was young, he was so excited for the breaks during the shows. He was really excited to see all the people gathering around him, but soon realized that most of them were only there to visit the menagerie, and this sight from far away was still his most wonderful memory. When they approached him, he quickly heard loud voices from two growing groups. One group wanted to spend time observing the hunger artist, not because they understood him, but just for fun or to be rebellious. These people were particularly hurtful to him. The second group simply wanted to go directly to the animal stalls. After the big groups left, some people who arrived late would come. Now they could stay as long as they wanted, but they hurried past without looking to the side, trying to reach the animals on time. It was a lucky moment when a father and his children approached the hunger artist. The father explained what was happening and reminisced about past performances. However, the children didn't fully understand because they hadn't learned about it before. What did fasting mean to them? However, the sparkle in their curious eyes hinted at the arrival of better and more delightful days. Maybe, the hunger artist thought to himself sometimes, things would be a bit better if he wasn't so close to the animal pens. That way, it would be simple for people to make their decision. Not to mention, he felt really sad and always felt down because of the bad smell from the stalls, the noise the animals made at night, the raw meat being carried by for the meat-eating animals, and the loud roars during feeding time. But he was too scared to talk to the administration about it. Anyway, he had the animals to be grateful for, because they brought lots of people to see him, and maybe there would be someone special in the crowd just for him. And I wonder where they would put him if he wanted to remind them that he was there and that he was just in the way of getting to the zoo. A little challenge. Well, a challenge that keeps getting smaller. People became accustomed to the idea that they should pay attention to a hunger artist during these times. Because of this, they formed an opinion about him. He tried his best to run as fast as he could, and he did. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save him. Everyone just walked right by him. Let's try to explain fasting in a way that's easy for kids to understand. If someone doesn't get it, then it's impossible to make them understand. The pretty signs got all dirty and hard to read. People took them apart, and nobody thought about putting new ones in their place. The little table that kept track of how many days the fasting had lasted, which was diligently updated every day at first, stayed the same for a while, because the staff got tired of doing even this small job after a few weeks. And so the hunger artist kept not eating for a long time, just like he had always wanted to do. He was able to do what he had said he would do, but no one was keeping track of how many days had passed. Not even the hunger artist himself knew how impressive his accomplishment was at this point, and he felt sad. And sometimes, when someone walked by and made fun of the old number, calling it a scam, that was the meanest lie that could be told out of indifference and meanness. The hunger artist wasn't being dishonest. He was working hard, but the world was not giving him the recognition he deserved. After a while, the days passed, and eventually, it all came to an end. At last, the cage caught the eye of a supervisor. He wondered why the attendant had left this cage here, unused and filled with old straw. No one knew until one person, with the assistance of the table with the number on it, remembered the hunger artist. They used a long stick to move the straw and discovered the hunger artist hiding inside. "Are you still not eating?" the supervisor asked. The person in charge said, "When will you finally quit?" "I'm sorry for everything," murmured the hunger artist. The only person in charge he listened carefully by putting his ear close to the cage and was able to understand him. "Sure," said the supervisor, tapping his forehead with his finger to show the audience how hungry the hunger artist was. "We forgive you. I always wanted you to like how I don't eat," said the hunger artist. "But we really like it," said the supervisor kindly. "But you shouldn't think it's great," said the hunger artist. "Well then, we don't like it," said the supervisor. "But why shouldn't we like it? I had to fast. I can't do anything else," said the hunger artist. "Wow, you're really struggling," said the supervisor. "Why can't you try something different?" "Well," said the hunger artist, raising his head slightly and speaking softly into the supervisor's ear, as if sharing a secret. "I couldn't find any food that I liked. If I had found that, trust me, I wouldn't have made a big show of myself and would have eaten as much as I wanted, just like you and everyone else." Those were his final words, but in his tired eyes there was a strong, although not as confident, belief that he was still refusing to eat. "Okay, clean this up now," said the boss. They put the hunger artist in the ground with some straw, but they placed a young panther in his cage. Even for someone who doesn't know a lot, it was really nice to see this wild animal playing in its cage, which had been boring for a long time. It had everything. The guards quickly brought food for the animal without much thought. The little creature loved the flavor and didn't seem to mind being without its freedom. This amazing body, filled with everything it needs, almost to the point of bursting, also seemed to bring freedom with it. It seemed like there was something stuck in its teeth, and it was so happy that it was hard for people to keep watching. However, they managed to control their excitement and continued to gather around the cage, showing no interest in moving forward.
Don't forget to like and done in the comment.